The wind tore through the forest, bending the trees like fragile bones. Seraphina felt the pulse of magic inside her chest grow restless. The prophecy whispered again in her mind, cruel and unrelenting. She whispered, "Not tonight." The pendant at her neck glowed faintly, answering her defiance. The air thickened, trembling with power. Through the rising mist, a shape appeared. A man moving as though the shadows obeyed him. Seraphina's heartbeat stumbled. Could this be the one she had been warned of? Every instinct told her to run, yet curiosity rooted her to the earth. The forest hummed with danger and longing. The man stopped, only his eyes catching the moonlight. A shiver crept down her spine. "Show yourself," Seraphina said, her voice steady but hollow. Silence answered. Then a whisper cut the air. "You can't escape what was written." Her breath hitched. The words came from everywhere and nowhere. She turned toward the sound, her courage trembling. Was fate already here? Dawn broke pale and uncertain. Seraphina sat by the dying fire, replaying every shadowed word. Lucian had vanished before sunrise, leaving only footprints dissolving in dew. She hated the silence he left behind. The prophecy's lines whispered again, echoing like chains around her heart. Her goal was clear: find the truth before it devoured her. Yet fear crawled beneath her calm. What if the truth loved her too much to let her go? A raven landed near, its eyes bright with unnatural intelligence. Seraphina murmured, "The signs are waking." The bird tilted its head, silent witness to her dread. A spark hissed from the embers, snapping her back. The forest exhaled slowly, as if listening. She rose, gripping her staff. Each step away from the fire felt heavier, like walking into her own destiny. The village below looked peaceful from afar, but Seraphina felt its heartbeat, nervous, hiding something. She entered quietly, hood drawn. Eyes followed her, whispers stirred like wind. She could sense the old magic buried beneath cobblestones. An elder approached, fear shadowing his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Seraphina answered softly, "Neither should destiny." His gaze faltered. Somewhere a child cried, and bells chimed 3 times, a warning or a welcome. Her pulse matched the rhythm. She needed knowledge, not safety. The prophecy was moving faster than she imagined. She turned toward the old chapel, its doors trembling with unseen power. Was Lucian already there? Inside the chapel, dust floated like ghosts. Seraphina felt the air thicken. Ancient sigils glowed faintly along the walls. She touched one and felt warmth spread through her palm. The voice returned, "Not human, not kind. Each heart that loves you shall burn." Her breath caught. "Then let it burn," she whispered. The candlelight flickered wildly as the door creaked open. Lucian stood there, shadow cutting across the floor. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "Then stop me," she replied. Their eyes met, tension sharp as steel. Outside, thunder rolled. Neither moved. The prophecy's flame had been lit. The storm unleashed its fury. Lightning split the sky as Seraphina and Lucian stood outside the chapel, the wind screaming around them. He shouted over the thunder, "You can't fight what's written." She raised her hand, magic flickering like fire. "Then I'll rewrite it." The ground quaked, the forest bending to her will. For a heartbeat, their eyes softened, love tangled with fear. A shadow moved behind them, another presence watching. The curse had awakened, hungry for its next chapter. Seraphina felt it coil around her heart, whispering promises of doom. Lucian reached out, but the wind tore them apart. The prophecy had begun. The forest erupted in chaos. Branches snapped behind Seraphina as something massive gave chase. The night pulsed with red light, magic gone wrong. "Lucian!" she cried, her breath tearing through the cold air. He appeared beside her, sword drawn, eyes burning with urgency. "It's found us," he said. Shadows lunged like living beasts, feeding on the storm she had unleashed in anger. The ground trembled as the curse awakened again, echoing its hunger through the roots. Seraphina's heart raced. This was no ordinary hunt. The prophecy was shifting. "We have to reach the river," Lucian shouted. She hesitated, sensing another presence beyond the mist. Not beast, but watcher. Her fear sharpened into resolve. She would not be prey. A voice whispered through the trees, calm and cruel, "Run, little witch." She turned toward the sound, and the world went still. The storm eased into silence. Seraphina and Lucian found refuge beneath a stone archway, the ruins humming faintly with old spells. Their chests heaved with exhaustion. "You still think this prophecy can be broken?" Lucian asked, his voice edged with disbelief. Seraphina's fingers brushed the cracked wall. "It has to be, or everything ends." Her words trembled. The air smelled of wet moss and fading magic. She caught Lucian's gaze, fear behind his steady mask. For a moment, the world shrank to their shared breath. "If you doubt me," she whispered, "leave before dawn." His silence was an answer of its own. Lightning flickered far away, revealing runes carved into the arch. One glowed faintly, the symbol of fate turning like an eye that never closed. Darkness thickened like smoke. Across the valley, a castle rose from shadow, the domain of Alaric, the sorcerer who had shaped the curse itself. Seraphina could feel his magic crawling beneath her skin. His laughter carried on the wind, cruel and patient. Inside the hall, Alaric stood before a mirror that reflected not his face, but Seraphina's. "Still fighting the thread," he murmured. His reflection answered with her voice, "You'll never break me." He smiled. "You already have." The mirror cracked, bleeding light into the room. "Far away," Seraphina shuddered, clutching her pendant. She whispered, "He's watching." Lucian looked up, alarmed. "Then we move now." But her mind was elsewhere, the reflection's words echoing, a threat that felt too close. At dawn they met the old hermit near the cliffside shrine. Seraphina knew his name before he spoke. Orion, the last keeper of forgotten truths. His eyes carried centuries. "You seek freedom," he said softly, "but prophecy was never your enemy." Seraphina frowned. "Then what is?" Orion's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Your heart. It believes it can choose." The words struck deep. Lucian stepped closer, uneasy. "You speak in riddles." Orion smiled faintly. "Only to those who fear their path." The morning wind howled through broken stones. "The curse was born of love once," he whispered. "Break it, and love may die again." Seraphina's resolve faltered. For the first time she wondered if her heart was the true danger. They descended the mountain in silence. The prophecy pulsed in Seraphina's thoughts like a heartbeat. Orion's warning replayed with every step. Lucian walked beside her, quiet but alert. "If you believe him," he said, "you'll never fight back." She stopped, turning toward him. "And if he's right?" The wind tore through the trees, scattering dust like stars. "Then you'll lose yourself," Lucian said. She lifted her hand, summoning a faint glow from her palm. "Then let the stars decide who I am." Her magic shimmered, defiant and fragile. Behind them the shrine cracked, the runes fading into dust. The path ahead curved toward a dark valley, the heart of the curse. Seraphina took the first step, voice steady. "This time I choose." The sun had barely risen when they reached the old mill. Seraphina could feel the tension in the air, the silence too heavy, the dust in the wind too thick. Lucian had insisted they rest here. He had even smiled when they arrived, but something in his eyes felt off. "It's safe here," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She nodded, though the feeling that had stirred in her all night wouldn't settle. The mill creaked, old wood groaning under the weight of secrets. A figure appeared in the doorway, an ally. Or was he the shadow that had followed them all along? She couldn't tell. Her heart raced. "You've brought them here?" Lucian asked, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The man stepped forward, his face half hidden by a hood. "I know you've been looking for me," he said, his voice smooth like honey. But in his eyes, Seraphina saw nothing but shadows. The wind blew through the broken windows, rattling the panes. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't place it. The man, known only as the guide, led them into the mill, offering them water and a safe place to rest. The walls were cracked, the floor rotted with age. Yet inside, there was warmth, a strange comfort that Seraphina couldn't shake. "We're not far now," the guide assured them, his words too smooth, too rehearsed. Seraphina studied him, trying to see past the comforting facade. "Why help us?" she asked, her voice cautious. The guide smiled, his teeth unnaturally white against the gloom. "I know what you seek, and I know the cost." The air thickened as he spoke, each word seeming to carry weight. Seraphina felt Lucien's gaze on her, but when she looked back at him, there was something unreadable in his expression. They both knew something was being left unsaid. "And what is the cost?" she pressed. The guide's smile widened, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "The price is always the same. Trust." The night fell faster than expected. The guide had left them alone for hours, but Seraphina couldn't shake the unease growing in her chest. She turned to Lucien. "What aren't you telling me?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "You trust him, don't you?" she asked. Lucien didn't answer immediately, his eyes looking away. "I trust no one," he finally replied. His voice was hard, colder than she had ever heard it. "But you trust me," she pressed. His gaze flickered to her, softening for just a moment before hardening again. "I've trusted you since the beginning," he said quietly. There was something unspoken, something heavy between them. The tension was unbearable. And then through the window she saw it, movement in the trees. A shadow. She stood up, heart pounding. Lucien grabbed her arm. "We need to leave, now." The words rang like a bell, too urgent to ignore. The trees outside the mill began to move, unnatural and swift. A low growl reverberated through the ground. Before Seraphina could react, the door crashed open, and the guide stepped in. But it wasn't him. Not anymore. His eyes glowed with a cold, unnatural light. "You should have listened," he said, voice no longer smooth but jagged. "You were always meant to be a tool in this game." Seraphina stepped back, heart racing, but Lucien didn't move. "You," Lucien said, voice thick with betrayal. "You were with him all along." The guide, or whatever he had become, smiled. "Of course. The prophecy doesn't care for your feelings, Lucien." With a sudden lunge, the guide reached for Seraphina. Lucien pushed her aside, taking the blow. She screamed. The world tilted, chaos exploding around them. Betrayal stung deeper than any blade. Lucien fell to the ground, breath shallow, face twisted in pain. Seraphina knelt beside him, her heart hammering in her chest. "Why?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she pressed against his wound. Lucien's eyes locked with hers. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The betrayal hit harder than she could have imagined. Lucien had been part of it all along. But it wasn't just the betrayal that shattered her. It was the truth. The love they'd shared was a lie. The guide, or whatever he had become, moved to the door, his presence looming like a storm. "The prophecy is just the beginning, witch," he called over his shoulder. "The end is yet to come." Seraphina watched him leave, her body numb. Lucien's hand reached for hers, his touch weak but real. "We still have a chance," he said, voice raw. She didn't answer. The coldness settled into her bones. But one thing was clear. She would never trust him again. The path ahead was dark, and the choices harder than ever. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and ash. Seraphina sat on the stone steps outside the ruined chapel, staring at the horizon where the sun struggled to rise. The world felt distant, cold. Lucien lay unconscious inside, his breath shallow, his betrayal still raw in her mind. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. The moment of clarity was fleeting, but it came like a crack in the storm. It was always going to be like this, wasn't it? She whispered to the wind. She should have seen it, should have known that every choice led her here. Her heart ached, the truth sinking in like stone. Lucien's lies had never been the only threat. It wasn't just him, or the guide, or the prophecy. It was everything. The deeper truth loomed ahead. But first, she needed to understand it. The ruins around her felt colder now, and the silence echoed her pain. "Where do I go from here?" she whispered, more to herself than to the empty world. She rose, dusting off her cloak, as a faint sound whispered from the trees, a voice not of the living. Seraphina's vision blurred as the past surfaced in flashes. The sound of horses, the warmth of a hearth, and Lucien's face, young and unscarred, came to her. She remembered the first time they had met, his laugh, the way his presence had made her feel safe. But that was before everything changed. "It was always a lie," she muttered. The world had never been as it seemed. She heard the echoes of their conversations, the promises he had made, the times he had said, "We're in this together." Was that ever real? The questions tore through her. She pressed her palm to her forehead, willing the memories to stop. But they wouldn't. She could see it now. The deception wasn't just in his eyes. It was in her own heart, the things she'd ignored. The door had opened, but it had always been locked from the inside. "How could I have missed it?" she whispered. And then in the silence, a voice spoke you weren't meant to see. The voice, that whisper of a presence, came again. This time closer. Seraphina rose, the weight of her own doubts pressing down on her. She moved toward the trees, the air thick with something ancient. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the figure of the mentor, Orion. His eyes, once filled with wisdom, now held something darker. "You knew," Seraphina said, her voice cold, betrayal rippling through her. "You always knew." He didn't respond immediately, but his expression was unreadable. "I told you once," Orion said, voice heavy, "that fate is not your enemy. It is only a mirror." Seraphina's heart sank. "Then why didn't you stop it?" she demanded. Orion's gaze turned inward. "There are truths you weren't meant to learn," he whispered. The words hung in the air, the gravity of them pulling her closer to the edge of her own understanding. She stared at him, trying to piece together the truth. Was he another part of the web of lies, or was he trying to protect her from something worse? The answer hung just out of reach. Orion stepped forward, the weight of his words pressing on Seraphina. "You were never meant to break the prophecy, Seraphina. It's not your fault." The guilt she had carried for so long threatened to consume her. "It was never your choice to make." Seraphina's hands shook. "Then whose choice was it?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Orion met her eyes, the truth of their connection flickering between them. "It was mine," he said. The air felt cold as the words settled like stones. Seraphina recoiled. "What do you mean?" "I was the one who set it in motion," he replied, his voice a bitter whisper. "You were the key all along." The ground beneath her seemed to shift. "And Lucien?" she asked, the question trembling on her lips. Orion's gaze darkened. "He was meant to guide you, but I couldn't protect you from what you needed to know." Seraphina felt the weight of the universe on her shoulders. "All this time, it was never what I thought." The truth had shattered her. There was no more room for denial. Seraphina walked through the night, her heart breaking with every step. The prophecy had been written by her, by the choices of those who came before her. She had always been the key, but not to the freedom she had imagined. Her hand clutched the pendant, its warmth now a cruel reminder of the path she had no choice but to follow. "So this was the truth all along," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her fingers trembled, but her resolve hardened. There was no more room for guilt. She had been a pawn, but now she would move with purpose. The enemy wasn't Lucien. It wasn't Orion. It was the very fate that had bound them all. She was done running. "I will change this," she vowed, her voice barely audible. The night stretched before her, dark, endless, but now full of possibility. Tomorrow, she would confront destiny itself. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Seraphina could hear the thudding of footsteps, echoing like a heartbeat. The world had gone silent, save for the sound of her own breath. She stood at the edge of the cliff, facing the dark figure that approached. Lucien was nowhere in sight. The tension in the air was palpable, thick and suffocating. Each step she took felt heavier, as if the weight of everything she had learned pressed down on her shoulders. She glanced at her pendant, its faint glow a reminder of everything she had fought for. "You came for me," the figure said, their voice low and mocking. "I didn't come for you," Seraphina replied, her voice sharp, the truth crashing into her like a wave. "I came for the answers." The figure stepped closer, their presence a storm of shadows. Seraphina's heart raced, but her hands remained steady on her staff. "Then you'll find only destruction," the figure said, voice dripping with venom. She didn't flinch. The world was about to break, but Seraphina would face it head-on. The figure stopped just out of reach, a cruel smile twisting their lips. "You still think you have control," they taunted. "The prophecy isn't something to fight, it's something to embrace." Seraphina's grip tightened on her staff. "I will never embrace the destruction you brought." The wind howled louder, as if the very air was alive with rage. The figure's smile faded, replaced by cold determination. "You've already embraced it, witch. You've already chosen." The ground beneath them cracked, a rift appearing between their feet. Seraphina took a step forward, her resolve solidifying. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm choosing to end this." She raised her staff, and the world around her seemed to pulse with magic, her energy merging with the storm. The figure laughed, a sound that shook the earth. "Then let's see if you can survive it." The storm erupted in full force, wind howling, magic crackling in the air. But in that chaos, Seraphina saw Lucien, stumbling forward, his face pale and bloody. "Lucien," she cried out, running to him, but he waved her off. "It's too late," he said, his voice hoarse. "You have to end this." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "But we were." Seraphina's throat tightened, the emotions swirling like a hurricane. Lucien reached for her hand, his touch weak but urgent. "I was never meant to be the hero, Seraphina," he whispered. "But you have to be. For all of us." A tear fell from her eye as the weight of his words settled in. She had been running, fighting, but now she had to face the truth. There was no going back. Lucien coughed, blood staining his lips. "I won't survive this, but you can." The words cut deeper than any blade. She nodded, feeling the truth of his sacrifice settle in her chest. It wasn't over yet, but it would be soon. The figure lunged forward, dark energy swirling around them, intent on destruction. Seraphina stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "You will not win," she said, her voice raw with determination. The figure sneered, raising a hand to strike. "You think you're strong enough to stop me?" they mocked. With a sudden burst of power, Seraphina thrust her staff forward, sending a wave of light crashing into the figure. The impact rocked the earth, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The figure staggered back, their dark energy flickering. "This is it," Seraphina whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. The figure's eyes flashed with fury, but there was something else. Fear. "You can't stop fate," they spat, their voice trembling. Seraphina's heart ached, but her resolve never wavered. This was her fight, her final choice. With a scream, she pushed forward, summoning every ounce of power she had left. The storm began to settle, the rage of the world fading into silence. Seraphina stood over the fallen figure, her body trembling, magic spent. Lucien lay beside her, his breath shallow but steady. The truth had been revealed, and everything had changed. She looked out over the broken world, the wind now a quiet whisper. "So this was the truth all along," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The weight of it all crushed her chest, but there was a flicker of something else, hope. The world was broken, but it was not beyond repair. "We can rebuild," she said quietly, as if the words could heal everything. The sun began to rise, casting its light over the shattered landscape. Seraphina closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the first true peace she had known in so long. The journey wasn't over, but it had begun again. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with its energy. Seraphina stood alone at the edge of the cliff, the ruins of the battle behind her. The world felt suspended in time. Smoke drifted lazily from the scattered remains of the field, and a faint light from the rising sun cut through the horizon. Her heart still thudded in her chest, the aftermath of everything. The fight, the loss, the revelations, settling like dust in the air. The silence around her was all-encompassing, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The cries of the fallen, the shattering of her past, all felt like distant memories now. She breathed deeply, the air cool against her skin. But no matter how deep the breath, the emptiness remained. She glanced down at her hands, the ones that had destroyed and created, and realized the loss was more than just physical. It was part of her now. The world would never be the same. "This is what remains," she whispered to herself, her voice faint, barely above the wind. And she knew what was lost was gone forever. Seraphina's thoughts drifted back to the moments before the battle, the faces of those she had lost. Lucien's smile, his hand in hers, and then the harsh reality of betrayal. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. "How could I have been so blind?" she whispered, the guilt curling in her chest like a tightening rope. The sound of birds returning to the trees caught her attention, their songs soft against the silence. The wind whispered through the branches, and for a moment, it felt as if time had begun to heal the wound. But the emptiness remained. "I gave everything," she thought, and it still wasn't enough. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her actions settle in. A voice, distant but clear, echoed in her mind. "This was your path to walk." She could feel the sting of the past, but in it, there was also a sense of peace. Life continued. The world kept turning. And so too would she. A shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing. Seraphina's heart skipped as she turned. It was Lucien, battered but alive, his face pale and tired. He had been gone, lost to her for so long, but now he stood before her, a faint trace of a smile on his lips. "I thought I had lost you forever," Seraphina said, her voice trembling with both relief and fear. Lucien's eyes softened. "I thought I had lost myself." There was a long pause, the weight of their shared silence heavier than any words. "I'm sorry," Lucien whispered, stepping closer. "For everything." Seraphina shook her head, the weight of the past still heavy on her heart. "We both have things to answer for." The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comforting. It was an acknowledgement, a moment of shared understanding. Lucien reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "It's not too late," he said softly. And for the first time in a long while, Seraphina felt the possibility of healing. The darkness, while lingering, was no longer all-consuming. Seraphina stood alone before the ruined chapel, her thoughts heavy with all that had been lost and gained. Her mind wandered to Orion, to his teachings and his legacy. The lessons he had imparted now seemed so distant, but his words still echoed in her heart. "The key lies in you," he had told her once. It was only now, after everything, that she truly understood. The weight of the past had shaped her, but it would not define her. As the sun rose higher, casting its light over the ruins, Seraphina felt the burden of destiny lift. It was no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. "Thank you, Orion," she whispered, her voice a soft echo in the still air. The past had shaped her, but it was the future she would now define. The world had changed, but so had Seraphina. She stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the horizon. The sky was clear now, the storm having passed. Everything had been torn apart, but from the wreckage, new growth would come. It wasn't just about fighting fate, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was about choosing it. The weight of her journey had finally shifted. She had made her peace, and now, with a quiet strength, she was ready for whatever came next. The world might not be perfect, but it was hers to shape. "Let it begin," she whispered. And with that she turned away from the past. The future awaited, and she was ready to face it, not with fear, but with acceptance. The air was still, a heavy silence hanging over the world. Seraphina stood alone in the aftermath, the echoes of the battle long faded. The wind had stopped, the storm had passed, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that never came. Around her, the remnants of everything, the broken earth, the blood-soaked ground, felt like distant memories lost to time. It was all over now, but the cost was immeasurable. She felt the weight of what had been lost. So many lives, so many choices. She could never undo it. But something had shifted within her. The truth was clear now. "Was it worth it?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath in the wind. Her heart knew the answer, but her mind could not fully grasp it yet. The world was quieter now, but she was not the same. The question would remain forever, but for now, there was peace. Seraphina walked away from the battlefield, her steps slow but steady. Each footfall seemed to echo in the silence, the world around her moving on, but she stayed the same. The sky above was clear, yet her heart carried the storm of everything that had come before. She thought of Lucien, of the mentor she had lost, of the choices she had made. The weight of them was unbearable, yet she kept walking. "I'm moving forward," she whispered to herself, as if saying it aloud would make it real. She glanced at the horizon where the sun began to rise, a new day beginning. With each step, the past felt more distant, like a memory she could no longer reach. But that wasn't the point. She had to keep going. There was nothing left to do but move forward, even if she didn't fully understand what lay ahead. In the quiet aftermath, Seraphina found a small, crumpled letter on the ground, a memory left behind. She unfolded it slowly, reading the words written in her own hand. It was from Orion, a final message before his passing. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything he had taught her. The key was never to defeat fate, Seraphina. It was to embrace it, to find peace with what is. She paused, the words lingering in her mind. She had spent so long fighting fate, but it had never been the enemy. It had always been part of her. A tear fell from her eye as she folded the letter, her heart aching with the loss of everything, yet strangely feeling a sense of closure. "This is the end," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. The world had started to move on. The birds had returned to the trees, and the people who had survived the battle began to rebuild. Seraphina stood at the edge of the village, watching as life began anew. The sun was fully risen now, casting its light over everything. There was no going back, no undoing the past. But there was a future, a chance to begin again. Seraphina turned toward the village, feeling a quiet strength settle within her. She had lost so much, but she had gained something too, clarity, purpose. "This is where I start again," she thought. The journey had taken its toll, but the road ahead was still hers to walk. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready for it. Seraphina stood at the center of the village, watching as life returned to its rhythm. She had fought, she had lost, but now she was here, standing strong. The road had been long and difficult, but she had come out the other side. "This is my beginning," she said softly, the words more of a promise than a declaration. The world was still broken, but it was hers to heal. And as the sun set, casting its last light over the village, she felt the weight of everything she had been through, but she also felt peace. "The journey is never truly over," she whispered, her heart steady, her resolve unshaken. She had faced the storm and come through it. And now, the future was hers to shape.